My girlfriend and I were on a romantic trip to Italy after a few months of emotional distance due to work. But on the final days of our trip, she suddenly wanted to stay without me to find herself, despite the original plan. I decided to cut her off financially and leave. Here's the story. My girlfriend Jay and I had been together for 2 years before the whirlwind of my current job changed things. Life with Jay was, well, something out of a feel-good movie. We met at a friend's barbecue and instantly clicked. She had this easy laugh and a way of seeing the funny side of everything, which made every day a little brighter. We spent countless evenings walking through the park, cooking together, or binge-watching TV series. We were that couple, always holding hands, always planning the next fun thing. Back then, my job was steady with predictable 9 to 5 hours, so I always had plenty of time for us. But as work picked up and I stepped into a more demanding role, our dynamic began to shift. It was subtle at first, missing a dinner date here, canceling plans there. I told myself it was just a busy phase and that I'd regain control of my schedule. Jay was understanding too, always saying she got it, that work was important. But no matter how supportive she tried to be, I could tell it was wearing on her. The past 2 months really highlighted how strained things had become. My new normal meant more late nights, unexpected weekend calls, and constant emails from home. We saw less of each other, and when we did, the exhaustion and stress were palpable. What used to be our downtime had turned into brief, often silent meals, with both of us glued to our phones. The intimacy that came so easily now felt like something we had to schedule, another task on my to-do list. These changes brewed undercurrents of resentment. Jay, once so laid-back and jovial, now snapped over minor things, like forgetting to buy milk or leaving a wet towel on the bed. We argued over these trivialities, but there was always an unspoken, heavier air about it, about time, about neglect. We hadn't had a big blowout, nothing that dramatic, but there was this constant nagging feeling of drifting apart, like we were slowly losing grip on what had made us. Recognizing the toll my new job was taking on both of us, I knew something had to give. I could see the strain in her eyes. The way her smile didn't quite reach as far as it used to. It was like watching the color fade from a vibrant painting. Guilt gnawed at me, a constant reminder that I wasn't there for her as much as I should be. She never complained much, but love doesn't need words to express when something's amiss. I decided to plan a vacation, something grand, a gesture to show Jay just how much she meant to me and, perhaps, salvage what was becoming of our once effortless connection. Italy seemed like the perfect escape, with its romantic landscapes, rich history, and the promise of delicious food. It was somewhere Jay had mentioned wanting to visit during our easier days. I imagined us wandering through the streets of Rome, riding a gondola in Venice, and sipping wine under the Tuscan sun, reclaiming the magic that we'd lost to routine and tired late-night apologies. I handled all the arrangements secretly, booking our flights and picking out the coziest hotels, aiming for a seamless, stress-free experience. When I finally told Jay about the trip, the surprise ignited a spark in her that I hadn't seen in months. The essence of Italy seeped into every moment of our trip, and it seemed each day offered a new adventure, a fresh opportunity to bridge the gap that had formed between us. One evening in Venice stands out vividly in my memory. We had booked a small boat to take us through the winding canals at dusk. The setting sun cast a warm, golden glow over the ancient buildings, and the water mirrored the sky, turning our surroundings into a canvas of oranges and pinks. The boatman maneuvered us expertly under low bridges and alongside colorful, slightly tilting buildings. Jay and I sat close, our hands intertwined. The sounds of distant chatter and the gentle splash of water against the boat filled the air. There was a peace in that moment, a quiet contentment that I hadn't felt in months. She rested her head on my shoulder, and it felt like we were the only two people in the world. Another highlight was our romantic dinner at a quaint little restaurant in Rome, tucked away in a narrow alley lined with ivy-covered walls. The restaurant was Jay's find, a place she had read about in one of her travel blogs. We dined outside under a string of small lights, the atmosphere buzzing with a soft murmur of other diners and the clink of glasses. We indulged in a meal of fresh pasta drizzled with truffle sauce that was nothing short of divine, paired with a bottle of local red wine recommended by our waiter. Jay's eyes sparkled under the fairy lights as we talked about plans for the future, about places we still wanted to see, and about starting fresh when we got back home. For a few hours, it felt like we had recaptured the magic of our early days together, laughing and sharing stories with an ease that I had sorely missed. These moments, so full of promise and rediscovery, made the sudden shift on our last day all the more jarring. As we stood on a cliff in Naples, with a vast blue sea stretching out before us, I couldn't help but feel like the picturesque scene was mocking us, presenting a stark contrast to the turmoil that was unfolding between us. Life can't be that perfect, I thought. That's when she dropped the bombshell. Out of nowhere, Jay told me she needed more time here in Italy, without me. She told me she wanted to stay longer to find herself and think about our relationship, but without me there, I was stunned. There was no lead-up, no conversation about feeling constrained or unhappy, not like this. Up until that moment, I thought we were healing, getting better, finding our way back to each other. But her words made it clear she felt differently. She hadn't planned this with me, hadn't even hinted at needing more space until that instant. It felt like a betrayal, not just of the plans we'd made together, but of the progress I thought we'd been making. I felt a mix of emotions swirling inside me. Anger, confusion, but mostly a deep, unsettling sadness. Here I was, thinking we were mending our relationship, while she was apparently still questioning everything about us. The idea of leaving her there in a foreign country tore at me, but so did the feeling of being so unexpectedly pushed away. It was supposed to be our trip, our time to reconnect. And now it was ending with her choosing to stay behind, to continue without me. This wasn't just a small hiccup, it felt like a seismic shift in what I thought our future was going to look like. The conversation escalated quickly. From her initial bombshell, we stood there overlooking the Mediterranean, the salty air mixing with the tension between us. I struggled to keep my composure. I needed to respond, to say something, because silence would just be acceptance, an agreement to her sudden plan without any consideration of what it meant for both of us. So, as calmly as I could muster, I addressed the financial side of her decision, a decision she had made alone, but one that would affect us both. Jay, I began, trying to keep my voice even. I want to support you in finding whatever it is you're looking for, but if this is something you need to do alone, then I think it's only fair that you take on the financial responsibility for it. 2. I explained that the trip, as planned, was something I could prepare for and budget for, but extending it was beyond what I had anticipated. As Jay's voice grew louder, her words cut through the gentle hum of the waves below. The tension was palpable, and her accusations stung deep. How can you just cut me off like this? Is this how you show your love? By holding money over my head, she said. Her eyes, usually so warm and inviting, now flashed with a mixture of frustration and desperation. I tried to keep my own emotions in check, to respond without escalating the situation further. Jay, this isn't about money, I replied, my voice steady, but filled with emotion. It's about us. About commitment. When you say you need to stay longer without me, it feels like there's something more, something you're not saying. The accusation stung. This wasn't about money, not really. It was about boundaries, respect for the decisions we were supposed to make together. This trip was meant to be a gesture of healing, not a gateway to a unilateral decision that left me both financially and emotionally overextended. She looked away, her eyes scanning the horizon. I could see the gears turning in her mind, wrestling with the implications of her desires versus the realities of our relationship. The air between us felt charged, heavy with unsaid things and unresolved emotions. I took a deep breath, trying to read between the lines of what she wasn't quite saying. The idea of her needing time alone now seemed to point to something more than just soul-searching. Jay, are you telling me everything? I asked gently, hoping to coax out what was really on her mind. We ended the conversation with no real resolution. The issue hung over us like a dark cloud. She was hurt, feeling unsupported in her moment of need for independence. I was confused and upset, feeling like the partner left holding the pieces while she sought something I couldn't give her. On those cliffs, we spent our last night in Italy in silence, each lost in our own thoughts, wondering what the next step would be for a relationship that had just faced one of its toughest tests. When I returned from Italy, the tension between Jay and me hadn't eased. The addition of our friends' opinions only magnified the stress. It started with a few offhand comments during a group video call. One of our mutual friends, Mark, mentioned hearing about our little disagreement in Italy. The word choice felt minimizing, and the discussion quickly spiraled from there. Dude, you left her stranded in Italy? That's harsh, Mark said, shaking his head. His tone more accusatory than concerned. Another friend, Lisa, chimed in. Yeah, I get that you're upset, but cutting her off financially? That seems a bit extreme. Their words stung. Here were people who knew us both, who understood our dynamics and the struggles we'd been facing lately. Yet, it seemed they only saw the situation from one side, Jay's. They weren't there to see the confusion and hurt in my eyes when she told me she wanted to stay behind. They didn't feel the weight of betrayal that I felt when my efforts to mend our relationship were met with a sudden demand for space and independence. I tried to explain my side, to tell them how blindsided I was, how we had planned this trip together as a couple, and how our sudden decision felt like a step away from everything we were supposed to be working on. It's not about the money, I insisted. It's about being left out of a major decision that affects both of us. It's about feeling like I'm not a partner, but a provider, to be switched on and off. But the conversation didn't go far. Their minds seemed made up, and the more I tried to justify my stance, the more defensive I sounded, which only seemed to validate their criticisms. The call ended with a heavy silence, and I was left feeling isolated, not just from Jay, but from my friends too. This rift made me question a lot of things, not just my relationship with Jay, but also my friendships. It felt like they were quick to judge, without understanding the full complexity of the situation. Or maybe, I wondered, had I failed to communicate the depth of my feelings effectively? Either way, I felt cornered and misunderstood, caught between defending my boundaries and appearing uncaring to the people whose opinions mattered to me. It was a precarious balance, trying to maintain my stance while navigating the disapproval of friends I had once relied on for support. Update. Wow, I can't believe my situation got so much attention. Well, thank you for all of your advice. A month had dragged by since Jay decided to extend her stay in Italy, a decision that stretched the fabric of our relationship to its limits. The weeks were marked by strained exchanges of messages, brief, cold, and sometimes days apart. I had hoped the distance might bring some perspective, perhaps soften the edges of the conflict we had left simmering. Yet, as her return approached, a knot of anxiety grew within me, tightening with each passing day. She didn't call to let me know she was coming. I simply heard the key turn in the lock of our apartment. The sound, once a signal of comfort, now struck a chord of apprehension. As she stepped inside, the air shifted, heavy with the weight of unspoken grievances and pent-up frustrations. She looked different. Tired, yes, but there was also a hard set to her jaw, an armor she had donned during her time away. The door barely closed behind her before the storm broke. How could you just cut me off like that? Jay's voice was sharp, her words slicing through the tense air. Her bags dropped to the floor with a thud, mirroring the heavy drop of my heart. I hadn't cut her off financially without warning. I had told her, during our last painful conversation in Naples, that if she chose to stay longer, she would need to do so on her own dime. But it seemed she had either misunderstood or chosen to reinterpret. The facts are, I didn't cut you off, I replied, trying to keep my tone level despite the rising tide of emotion. I said if you decided to stay longer, you'd need to manage without my financial support. You made that choice, not me. You left me stranded in a foreign country, she exclaimed, her face flushed with anger. The moment she said it, the accusation felt like a slap, harsh and unfounded. It was the breaking point after weeks of built-up tension and uncertainty. I didn't leave you stranded, Jay. You chose to stay. We had a return ticket already booked, I retorted, my voice rising to match hers. I felt betrayed, not just by her decision to extend her stay without discussing it with me, but now by her twisting of the facts. It was as if the careful plans I had made, meant to bring us closer, had been forgotten and discarded like an inconvenient truth. The argument spiraled quickly. Jay paced back and forth in the living room. Each step seemed to echo her escalating frustration. You could have supported me, understood that I needed more time, she argued, throwing her hands up in exasperation. And you could have talked to me about it. I shot back, frustration rising in my chest. The gap in our perspectives seemed insurmountable. I had envisioned our discussion as a chance to air our grievances and seek understanding, perhaps even find a way to mend the rift between us. Instead, it turned into a volley of accusations and hurt feelings. As we argued, the hurt became palpable, filling the space between us with words and silences, both equally heavy. The room felt smaller, as if the walls were inching closer with each passing moment of our disagreement. I could see the strain in her eyes, mirroring my own fatigue. It was draining, this dance of stubbornness and pride. And it hurt more because it was with Jay, the person I had once been so in sync with. Finally, with neither of us willing to budge, Jay grabbed her bag and keys. I can't do this right now, she said, her voice breaking a little. I need some space to think. Away from here. Without another word, she left the apartment to stay with a friend. The door closed with a definitive thud, marking the physical and emotional distance now fully imposed between us. The weeks following Jay's departure from our apartment were a haze of confusion and melancholy. I tried to keep myself busy, diving into work and avoiding our mutual friends as much as possible. I wasn't ready to face their questions or the pitying looks. It was during one of these long evenings, as I was leaving the office later than usual, that I ran into Ben, a close friend who had always been more like a brother to me. Hey man, Ben greeted me, his expression uneasy, as if he was wrestling with something he wasn't sure he should say. We decided to grab a coffee, finding ourselves seated across from each other in a quiet cafe that was almost closing for the night. The low buzz of the few remaining patrons gave us a semblance of privacy. Ben hesitated, stirring his coffee slowly. Look, I wasn't going to say anything at first. I thought it wasn't my place, and maybe it isn't. He trailed off, looking up at me with a serious expression. But I heard from she's close with one of Jay's friends. You know that Jay's been, well, she borrowed quite a bit of money from friends and relatives back when she was in Italy. I felt a knot form in my stomach. Borrowed money? The Jay I knew was financially prudent to a fault. Ben continued, yeah. And there's more. They said she partied a lot over there, got pretty wild. He paused, the weight of his next words hanging between us. She met someone, something happened. And now she's back here, and she's pregnant. The news hit me like a physical blow. Each word was a punch that knocked the wind out of me. Pregnant? My mind raced as I tried to piece together the fragments of this new, jarring reality. But Ben wasn't done. There's talk that she's planning to make a scene, to claim the kid is yours, to get you to take responsibility. I was stunned into silence, the coffee in front of me growing cold. It felt surreal, like a plot from one of those overly dramatic TV shows Jay and I used to watch together and criticize for being too unrealistic. But this was real. And it was happening to me. Why would she do this? I finally managed to ask, my voice a mixture of disbelief and anger. I don't know, man, Ben replied, shaking his head. Maybe she's desperate. Maybe she's not thinking straight. But I thought you should know from someone who cares about you. I thanked Ben, my mind a whirlwind of emotions as I left the cafe. The night air felt colder as I walked home, the streets empty and echoing with the footsteps of my solitary return. Betrayal, confusion, hurt. It was all there, building up a storm inside me. What was I going to do? How could I confront Jay about this? The trust we had built over years seemed to crumble in an instant, leaving me to navigate the debris of our shared past and an uncertain, possibly contentious future. The days following my conversation with Ben were a blur of sleepless nights and distracted days. The seed of doubt he had planted grew into an overwhelming tangle of suspicion and uncertainty. Was Jay really planning to betray me so profoundly? Or was this all some kind of misunderstanding? I needed answers, and I needed them before Jay could make any moves. I started with our mutual friends, casually bringing up Jay in conversations to gauge their reactions. I'd steer the topic towards our relationship, watching carefully for any signs of discomfort or evasion that might suggest they knew more than they were letting on. Despite my efforts, nothing substantial came out of these interactions. It was as if Ben's story was an echo in a void, leaving me even more isolated with my worries. Frustrated but not deterred, I decided to take a more direct approach with someone who would know the truth. Kay, one of Jay's closest friends. She had always been honest with me, never one to mince words or shield her thoughts behind polite facades. If anyone would tell me the truth, it would be her. I reached out to Kay under the guise of needing advice about how to repair things with Jay, a pretext that wasn't entirely false. We met at a small cafe, one of those cozy places with a comforting buzz that makes it easier to open up. As we sat down with our coffee, the casual start quickly shifted as I probed deeper. Kay, I've heard some things, and I just want to understand what's going on with Jay. I began, my voice steady, but my hands betraying me with their slight tremor. I watched Kay's face closely. Her expression changed from friendly concern to a more guarded weariness. What have you heard? She asked, her tone cautious yet curious. I hesitated, then decided to lay it all out. That I might be trying to trap me. Makes me believe I'm responsible for a situation I had no part in creating. That she might be expecting me to step up and claim the child as mine. But the circumstances aren't what they seem. Kay's demeanor shifted as she continued, her eyes still fixed somewhere outside the window, perhaps finding it easier than meeting my gaze directly in such a difficult moment. And there's something else you should know, she added, turning back to look at me, her expression a mix of sympathy and resolve. After Jay realized she was pregnant, she panicked. Given everything, she didn't know how to handle it, so she got a paternity test done, just to be sure, you know? Kay's voice was steady, but her hands fidgeted with a coffee cup in front of her. The results came back, and you are not the father. I was shocked. The Italian guy was out of the picture now. Kay paused, giving me a moment to absorb the news. As my final hope that the child could be mine faded away, I was left grappling with the weight of it all. This was a lot to process. She's really scared, Kay continued. She doesn't know what to do next, and I think in her panic, she thought maybe turning to you would somehow fix things. Maybe she thought the baby could be yours, and that would make everything easier for her to manage. Kay looked genuinely pained to be delivering such news. Her loyalty to Jay strained against her moral compass as she struggled to tell the truth. "I'm telling you this because I think you deserve the whole picture," she said softly. "It's a mess, I know. But Jay is really struggling with what to do next. She's mentioned wanting your help, not just financially, but also emotionally. Maybe hoping that there was a chance this situation could bring you back together. It's not fair to you," Kay added, her voice laced with sympathy. "And I thought you should know the truth before anything went further." Sitting back, I tried to process everything Kay had laid out. The complexity of Jay's actions, driven by fear and a desperate grasp for stability, was overwhelming. The paternity results only added another layer of betrayal and sadness to the situation. It wasn't just about the breach of our relationship now. It was also about the impact of her decisions on an innocent life. "Thanks, Kay, for being honest with me," I said finally, finding my voice after a long silence. "This changes a lot. I need some time to think about all of this, about what I want to do, and how I can handle this situation without making things worse for anyone involved." Kay nodded, understanding the weight of the moment. "Of course. Take all the time you need. If you want to talk more, or if you need anything, I'm here." As I left the cafe, the cool air felt sharp as I breathed it in. The news had not only clarified but also complicated the situation further. Now, more than ever, it was crucial to approach the next steps with careful thought and consideration for all parties involved, especially the unborn child caught in the middle of this turmoil. I wasn't sure what to do next. Part of me wanted to confront Jay immediately, to demand explanations and perhaps hear her side of the story, however painful it might be. Another part of me wanted to retreat, to process the hurt and protect myself from further pain. Every logical step I could take from here, seeking legal advice, preparing for potential disputes, distancing myself from Jay, seemed cold and clinical, far removed from the emotional chaos raging inside me. By the time I reached my apartment, the sun had set, and the early evening darkness felt fitting, mirroring the uncertainty that lay ahead. The decision of what to do next loomed large, daunting in its significance. As I turned my key in the lock, the familiar sound seemed strangely foreign, as if even my sense of home was questioning where I belonged. Inside, the quiet of my apartment was a stark contrast to the storm of thoughts in my mind. I sat down alone, with the echo of Kay's last words stretching out before me. After 3 days of agonizing over everything, I decided it was time to face Jay. I needed clarity and closure, no matter how painful the conversation was going to be. I texted her, asking if we could meet at the little coffee shop where we'd spent countless lazy Sunday afternoons together. It felt like a neutral place, public yet intimate, appropriate for the kind of serious conversation we needed to have. She was already there when I arrived, her eyes red-rimmed, a clear sign she'd been crying. As I sat down opposite her, the air felt heavy with all the things left unsaid between us. "I know everything, Jay," I started, trying to keep my voice calm despite the turmoil inside me. "I know about the guy in Italy, the pregnancy, and your plan to make me believe I could be the father." Her face crumpled at my words. "I was so confused," she managed to say, her voice a whisper. "I thought maybe if you thought the baby was yours, we could go back to how things were." The hurt was palpable, stinging fresh like a wound reopened. "Jay, we can't go back," I replied, feeling a strange mix of anger and pity. "Trust doesn't work that way. I can't just overlook this. It's too big." There was a long pause, filled only by the soft murmur of other patrons and the clink of coffee cups. Finally, I took a deep breath and continued. "I've decided. I'll help you clear your debts from the trip. It's the last thing I can do for you, out of whatever love and care is left." Jay started sobbing, her shoulders shaking. It was tough to watch, knowing how deeply intertwined our lives had been. "But after that, we go our separate ways," I added. "It's for the best." Helping her financially was a decision I made, not just out of mercy for her, but as a way to free myself too, from guilt, from the what-ifs, and from a relationship that had become too fractured to mend. As hard as it was, I knew it was the right step towards healing, towards not letting this situation keep a hold on me any longer. As I stood up to leave, the finality of the moment sunk in. Jay had been a significant part of my life, but it was clear that chapter had to close. Walking out of the coffee shop, I felt a weight lift off me, a sorrowful relief, knowing that this was a necessary end for both of us to move forward. As I reflect on the journey I've shared with you all here, I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to everyone who took the time to comment and offer their support and advice. Your words have been a beacon during this tumultuous time, guiding me through moments of doubt and encouraging me when the path seemed too difficult to navigate alone. The wisdom shared in the comments was not only invaluable in helping me make informed decisions, but also provided comfort in knowing that I was not alone in this struggle. Many of you shared your own stories, which reminded me that life's trials are universal, yet they also bring us together in understanding and solidarity. I am especially grateful for those who reminded me to stay true to my values and to approach this situation with integrity and compassion. Your reminders to protect my emotional well-being and seek professional advice were crucial in navigating the complexities of this situation. Thank you too for the reminders about self-care and the encouragement to look forward after difficult choices. These messages help me maintain perspective and focus on healing. To everyone who commented, your support has made a real difference in my life during this challenging time. I am moving forward with a renewed sense of purpose and hope, buoyed by the kindness and wisdom of this community. Thank you for being a part of my journey.